will want to just highlight on what is memory access coalescing from whatever you have read in the videos. Studied from the videos and read through the PDF we have uploaded. Ayon?
Sir, memory access coalescing is basically meaning that instead of getting data one by one for a single thread, we are getting like there are 32 threads in a warp. If we can get 32 blocks of data at a single time, which are stored sequentially in the global memory, we can significantly reduce the overall memory access time required.
Right. So if you remember the GPU's memory hierarchy, you have each of the streaming multiprocessors which have got inside them a register file, and that register file is partitioned across scalar processors. And there is a shared memory which is shared by all the scalar processors, or the threads execute inside a block which is mapped in the streaming multiprocessor. And all these SMs connect to a common unified L2 cache, which again connects through a memory controller to the global memory, right? And if you so there are three levels of memory accesses happening. Every thread has got the part thread local memory. If it's like we have said, if it can be a big array, then it's again technically in the global memory. But in general, for single variables, they are all in the register file. And there is per block shared memory, and then there is part device global memory. For every kernel, based on whatever is the kernel's address space as defined by the program, there will be a part device global memory, right? And accordingly, there are three kinds of memory access that any thread can do: global, shared, and registered. And in that order, they are slowest to fastest. Now, what happens is, since the global memory is slowest, so what the GPU does is it provides a mechanism so that you can get the maximum bandwidth out of the global memory. The idea is it is slowest, but it can be accessed using a wide bus. So the GPU hardware allows that you can read 32 consecutive memory words, and each word can have a size of 4 bytes. So let's say an integer of 32 bits, that is in 4-byte memory word, right? So this 32 cross 4, that is this 128 byte wide memory bus is there, through which you can do a parallel read. Now, what does that mean? I mean, of course, if you want to read, make such parallel read, you need threads to be executing in the same warp, right? Because otherwise, if you have different threads which are going to access 32 consecutive 4-byte words in the memory, they need not execute at the exact time, right? So for all those threads to execute at the same time, they have to belong to a same warp, right? So that is why a warp actually requests a global memory transaction. The memory transactions happen at the warp level, and one warp can request the global memory transaction, and based on that, the global memory is accessed using a 128 byte wide access, right? So if the threads in the warp are arranged in such a way that they are accessing consecutive locations in the memory, then suppose all of them are trying to read consecutive locations, then that will not mean 32 individual global memory accesses. That will mean one single global memory access. That is the whole and simple idea here of global memory coalescing. So if your program logic is such that you have more amount of coalesced access, then your code will be more optimized. That is a simple idea. As an example here, we took a small example. So what we did, we created a memory access a kernel. All that is doing is accessing consecutive locations in the memory, right? You are computing the thread ID, and you are doing a memory access of that location, just incrementing that location's value by 1 and writing it back, right? Let's assume for simplicity here that the warp size is 8, though in a general, this is just for our presentation purpose. Ideally, it is 32. So what is happening? When you are doing the access, you see you have, for one warp, you have 8 parallel threads that are executing in lockstep. So that will not mean there are 8 global memory transactions, one for each thread. So what will happen is all these threads, so thread ID 0 is accessing A0, thread ID 1 is accessing A1, so on and so forth. So all of them will together make a common global memory request. So here the access is fully coalesced. So there is a coalesced read and there is a coalesced write. So one memory transaction for read and one memory transaction for write, right? And that's how it goes. Now if you do an offset based access, so here you have an offset factor, so TID plus X. Now this kind of stuff, like when you are, I mean, since you will be doing what we call as data driven programming, like you are, I mean, your programming for GPUs are very much data intensive, and you will have the data in high dimensional arrays. In most cases, the tricks that you will play is with how you access the array elements and how you write the program, and there is a terminology for that. We call this kind of expressions as access expressions. Like, what is the location in an array that the ith thread is accessing? Okay, so suppose, I mean, it is some I into f plus g. So then I into f plus gth location is this is a access expression. That is the common programming language terminology that we use here. Fine. So here, when you do this offset based access, now let's add an offset factor here. Let's say the offset factor is initially is 1. So what does that mean? So 0th thread is accessing A1, thread 1 is accessing A2, like that, right? Now as you can see, so the warp 0, which has got threads 0 to 7, they are not accessing elements A0 to A7, right? Now you may question that, well, these all are in the same, they are all consecutive, right? I mean, A1 to A8 is also consecutive. True, it is consecutive, but the issue is they are not aligned. So if you look into our definition, we have an important thing here: 32 aligned 4-byte words. Anybody can explain what does it mean by this alignment here?
So like memory will usually be a two-dimensional storage pattern. So
Right.
data will be stored in the form of rows and columns. So by
Right.
alignment meaning all of the data will be in the same row, and hence all of them can be accessed parallelly.
Wonderful. So that's exactly how it is in the physical memory. So the important thing is, when we have this case that I have A1 to A8 locations being accessed, although they are consecutive, but they are not aligned, right? The alignment has to be 32 cross 4. That is for a standard GPU memory, it's 128 byte. I mean, the memory address sequence has to be inside this range. That means the starting, you do a module of 128, you are inside this range. Only then we will call it a byte aligned access here, right? So this is here the requirement is it should be byte aligned with this 128 bytes. But here it is not so. So each of these rows can result in one global memory read. Since now, although being consecutive, they are spread across 2 rows, so there will be 2 global memory reads. Fine. And as you can understand, if I just increment S equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, similarly the alignment, what is happening? How, for example, let's say S equal to 4. How many global memory reads are required for one array update by the kernel for a single warp? Let's say S equal to 4. Hello?
Sir, 4.
4.
A0. No, sorry.
2 in this case, 2.
4, so then why 4? You see, if it is 4, then you are not starting at A1, you are starting where? 2, 3, 4. So you are starting from here and you are ending up where? At A11. So you are still inside 2 rows only, right?
Oh yes, sir.
Even with 5, 6, 7, you are only using 2 rows of the memory. So per warp, the number of global memory rates is still 2, and the number of global memory writes will also be still 2. Again, S equal to, finally you make it 8, then what happens?
Next row.
Again, a single row
Only
will be
one.
accessed.
So a single row of read and a single row of write, right? So for S equal to any multiple of 8, now don't go by 8. The idea is, it's dictated by the memory width and the warp size, okay? Now typically now you can understand why people have chosen a warp size of 32. It is also driven by this memory width thing, right? So ideally you will like to have a warp size which is kind of in a I mean in a it should be wholly dividing the memory width, right? So in this case, if you have to solve a problem where I specify that, well, I am giving you an warp of size 32 and how many global memory transactions are required, I should also tell you that for the global memory transaction, what is the global memory width of read and write, right? Then that is a complete specification of the problem. Now in this case, since the warp size is 8 and global memory transactions have been defined to be, I mean, well, I mean, the global memory width that we are considering here is also 8 here. So that definitely means that here these eight threads in the warp, when they are going to access the global memory, in the best case, when S is any multiple of 8 starting from 0, it is getting fully a one single row access of the global memory. So that's a single memory transaction. And otherwise, if I increase the offset, that will become a double number of memory transactions. So that's basically offset based access. And the other case can be what we popularly call as strided access. So in general, any access expression will have a stride factor and an offset factor. So that is the general case. The general case is TID star S plus some constant. So that plus something is the offset and S is the stride. So now let's see what happens with stride. So let's say the S equal to 2. Now again, you can see the items which are highlighted in red, those are going to be read by the threads in the warp. So how many global memory transactions will happen, assuming that this transaction width here is 8, right? Now, since the transaction width is 8, and that means the transactions are now spread across 2 rows of the global memory. So you will have again 2 global memory transactions for read and write, right? And then again, once you have it as 4, let's say S is 4, then as you can see, for warp 0 also, all the TIDs of 7 times 4 goes to 28, right? So you are accessing element A0, A4, A8, this should also be in red, A12, 16, 20, 24, and 28, right? So essentially you will require 4 global memory reads and 4 global memory writes, right? So that's how the stride is affecting the reads and writes. So suppose you want to make out, I mean, what is the effect of strides on the, I mean, due to this increase in global memory transactions, what is the effect on the memory system, right? Suppose I want to find out that when I am executing this kernel, what is the number of bytes which are getting read and read from the memory per unit time. So that would be the maximum memory bandwidth that my program is kind of exploiting, right? What is the maximum memory bandwidth of my program? So I can write this program in a profiling mode like this, and I can get it. So I think in the tutorials, we have already covered these things, right? How to profile CUDA programs using CUDA events. So you can create a CUDA event, destroy a CUDA event, and you can use the CUDA event data structures to record the timestamps at specific programming points, right? So as you can see here, you can create a CUDA event, I mean start event, another CUDA event stop event, and these two events are kind of enclosing the call to this offset access kernel we were describing, right? Now you are calling this kernel multiple times inside the loop where you are passing this offset factor, you are increasing that plus s factor, which is here I, from 0 to 32, right? You are increasing the offset. And whatever you are finally doing is you are finally computing what is the elapsed time between the start and stop event. That means you are computing the time required for this kernel to execute with different values of that offset factor, right? And then that timing you are decreasing, you are dividing using that timing. Okay, here there should be a slash n, right? I mean, this is a new line symbol. So finally you are printing this, what is the total amount of memory access that has to be done. So this is the total amount of memory access that has to be done by all the blocks. So your block size is this, total number of threads is this, right? And you are dividing this by the amount of time that has been required by the kernel to execute. So if you execute this program, what you get is the total amount of, I mean, data transfer that the kernel did per unit of time, right? Because in every execution, it is supposed to do this amount of data transfer, and you are computing the time required for that. So you are calculating in this way what is the total global memory bandwidth that this kernel required, right? Now, the same thing you can also do for the strided access kernel, right? Now, coming back to this. So, for this offset access, what do you expect the graph to look like? Hello?
Sir, since you explained earlier that while for an offset, like at multiples of 8, it will reset back to its original value. So, and at other values, there will be a small dip. So it will be
Right.
like
So,
periodic sort of.
so it's not going to differ too much. It is going to just double up the time and then again go back to the original time, right? And that's what happens. You see the offset access, you just increase the offset from S for the different values, you get it increased a bit. And then again in a multiple of 32, our example was based on warp of 8 for pictorial representation simplicity. But for the actual warp of 32, this same thing will happen, right? So at 32 again, the offset, with offset 32, it's same as offset 0. So your performance goes back. However, with strided access, as you can see, the performance will come down a hell of a large number, right? So with increase of the value of the stride, the more you increase the multiplication factor, definitely you are accessing more and more far away memory elements in the global memory. So the more you increase the stride, the global memory bandwidth is only going to decrease because you will need more number of transactions per warp. Is that clear to all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes, sir.
Anybody else has any question up to this? Think this is
Sir, can
very,
we go
yeah,
back to the slide where there was the code or the time measurement?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
what happens if we don't put the CUDA event synchronize?
Okay, ideally the CUDA event synchronize you will require. I mean, you have understood what is CUDA event synchronize?
It is supposed to synchronize to event record starts, right?
No, here what is happening, it is basically trying to, I mean, you launch this code in what we call as the default CUDA stream. Okay. Now,
Okay.
these are all markers that will be stored in the queue of the stream. Now, for getting this value, you actually need to give this, because then this will stop recording with with nothing remaining in that queue for the stream. Okay, I think this will be even clear when we teach you CUDA streams. For the time being, just think that it is necessary. When we teach CUDA streams, this will be even clear.
Okay.
And same thing is also required here. For the timing, you just take it that it is required. When we go into the CUDA streams part, we will make these things more clear.
Okay, sir.
Like when we are executing the code, I mean, this is basically what we call as the default stream. Anyway, right now we'll just continue with this. We'll discuss that specific thing in the CUDA streams lectures. Okay, anything else?
I have a doubt here.
Yes.
Near stride of 15, there is a jump. So does that jump signify something?
Not really. I mean, this is just a profiling result. It could have
So-
happened for many scenarios, maybe some cache or something. I mean, it doesn't have really any inference to us.
Because there are jumps at 8, 16, 24. If you look closely.
At 8, yeah, you are right. 8, there is a jump. 16, there is a jump. 24, no, 24, very, very minute, right? You are. Okay, let us try and think a bit. Every time it is going to increase only. I mean, with a factor, right? Because the global memory reads are increasing. Okay, I have one hunch. Anirban, hello?
Yes, sir.
Can we run these codes once without the outer loop?
Without the outer loop.
I mean, in
Okay.
each execution of the loop, we'll just get the value for a single call, just to make sure there is no effect of the cache.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Let us see,
Okay.
because the small jumps, as we can see, they are also occurring. I mean, in some form, they have an effect here also, maybe.
Hmm. Like I
Apart
think
from cache,
this
I'm not sure why. Yes.
I think this amount of variation would anyways be there. Like if we run this entire loop,
Yeah, I
say,
also think it's a statistical thing. It should be there just to be sure that there is no effect of the cache at all.
yeah.
Here, there may be an effect because we are running it in the loop, right?
Okay, I'll check that.
So maybe in the next call, the previous call, some things maybe already there in the cache.
Hmm.
Let's check up once.
Okay.
Okay, we'll again check this and come back, right? I mean, in general, I don't think, because maybe these are just minor offsets. Let us see still. There is the only possibility here actually. Okay, now let's come to the issue of shared memory. So just to understand, like the entire idea of global memory coalescing has been because I mean, it's very slow. So the more you are able to coalesce, then you are able to reduce the number of memory transactions done, global memory transaction done per word, and that is like an index of how efficient your code is. But apart from this, you also have the shared memory, and accessing the shared memory, since it is not off chip and it is located inside each SM, so shared memory access is very fast, not as fast as the register, but of course more than an order of magnitude faster than the global memory. So let's see how using the shared memory can be useful, because if I can bring some data into the shared memory, then what happens? As we have discussed earlier also, the shared memory offers a transparent view to all threads inside a block. So it's like a per block shared memory. When there is a kernel that is executing, and let's say block 0, block 1, block 2, they are all getting mapped to some SM0, which is containing a shared memory 0. Now this shared memory 0 will now get divided in parts to block 0, block 1, block 2, which are mapped to the SM. Okay. So block 0, which will have its own different part physical access to the SM to the shared memory. The block 1 will have again another part of the shared memory which is accessible to it. So as you can, what I'm trying to say is the shared memory is now getting divided across the blocks, and each block has access to some part of the shared memory, and all the threads inside the block can actually collaborate and share that data and update that data without any kind of synchronization primitive. Is this clear? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, plus sometimes please give a feedback, otherwise I feel I am disconnected. Okay, so as you can understand, this shared memory offers you a good scope of optimization, because if you have to implement a programming logic where certain things can be collaboratively used and computed by threads, then it makes sense for a bunch of threads to put them inside a block, bring the data that is required by these threads together collaboratively by a collaborative load, and then all the threads use each other's computation outputs on the shared memory and then compute what they are trying to do. Okay, we have a classic example here on matrix multiplication, but before going to that, one interesting thing is, finally think this shared memory, L1 cache, these are all some physical memory blocks, right? So in this case, they are a memory block that is located inside the inside each of the SMs, right? And the physical hardware is basically the same, but how do you define the hardware? Based on that, it depends that how that hardware will behave. What I am meaning to say is that the same memory segment, physical memory, can be made to behave like a shared memory, and the same physical memory can also be made to behave like a L1 cache. What would be their difference if I make a memory behave like a shared memory and if I make a memory behave like a L1 cache? What would be their difference? Can anybody say? How is an L1 cache different from a shared memory?
So in shared memory, all of the threads will have access to it, but in L1 cache, it will be divided per thread.
Right. So it will be divided per thread. So as you can understand, it is all in software logic, right? There is nothing significantly different in the hardware. It is all in how the software is viewing that memory, defining the bytes and giving access to the threads, right? So the CUDA runtime system can definitely manage that. That is why what happens is when the shared memory is configured by your kernel, you can actually use this kind of CUDA device set cache config, this kind of kernel calls to define what part of the shared memory what part of that memory you want to be configured as a shared memory and what part you want to be configured as an L1 cache. Suppose you have more amount of collaborative work to be done by your algorithm, then you will set higher amount of shared memory. Suppose you have more amount of part thread activity, part thread individual non-collaborative activity to be done by your algorithm, and there is not much data communication required across the threads, then you will like to have more amount of L1 cache. Am I clear? So that depends on your choice, and accordingly for any algorithm that you are coding, you can configure this thing up. Now, just
Sir?
to, yes?
Sir, in general, it is like when you have any algorithm or any program that requires a lot of memory sharing, sorry, a lot of data communication, like maybe the way it is in Hadoop and all that. So in those kind of environments, like big data technologies that are using parallelization,
Yes.
so they are also shared memory based or L1 cache memory based?
No, they are at a much higher level. See, I mean, big data things are big. Here, we are just talking about, what should I say, a basic hardware on which we are running some software. Okay, and we are trying to see how that memory is, how that memory is being used.
Okay.
So, I mean, this has got nothing to do with how a big data system works or right. A big data system is like a at a much higher level of abstraction. It may involve multiple computers, right? First of all. So when you have something like Hadoop, it's basically a distributed file system. So everything related to data sharing and all that is going on at a much higher level of computer systems. Here we are looking at a more fine-grained definition of systems. Okay, you will see a lot of people talking about big data, but here whatever we are talking is at a much lower level to understand how really the semiconductor device works. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So everybody knows this code. I think most of you have already gone through the video, but I am just speaking through this again so that if anybody has missed. So everybody knows this code, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So we don't need to explain what it is doing. It's a simple matrix multiplication. So what is going on is what is the part thread activity? Can anybody say what is each of the threads doing?
So it's computing the final result of ij element.
Right. So you have you have defined a suitable block and grid mapping so that the total number of threads is equal to some n square, where n cross n is the output matrix size, right? And each thread, each i comma jth locations corresponding thread is computing its final value by accessing the rows of the input matrix 1 and column of the input matrix 2, right? And so that's what is going on now. Well, this picture has a bit of issue. So just view this second matrix to be the first one and the first matrix to be the second one, right? So then what is going on? Each thread is accessing all the row elements of a single row and all the column elements of a single column of the second matrix. Row elements of the first matrix and column elements of the second matrix. Am I correct?
Yes.
Hello?
No, like the order is interchanged here, but
Yeah, I mean, this should be here and this should be here. Okay. But then I'm just trying to understand what is the per thread memory access required for computing one element here. So for computing one element here, let's say this is the ijth element. Then the I comma jth thread in the in my original grid is going to access one single row of the matrix 1 and the jth column of matrix 2. What is the total number of memory accesses required for doing that?
so the row access will be coalesced. So n row elements will be accessed in divisions of 32. So that's why they're n by 32. And column memory accesses cannot be coalesced. So it's a total n elements, so n accesses.
Sridhar Singhal, are you there?
Yes, sir.
So why is Oyon saying that column accesses will not be coalesced?
So because we are storing in the form of row major, if we use column major storage, then columns will be coalesced, but rows won't be.
Okay. Naveen Tiwari, is this fine?
Yes, sir, correct. Because here we are considering that one warp contains only 8 threads, right? So only 8 continuous memory in the row, they are coalesced. So in column, every row will be in a different cycle.
Lavina Kelwani, you are there? Lavina Kelwani,
Yes, sir.
can you explain this expression here?
So in this expression, it says that there is a vector, like in simple words, it's a vector multiplication where you calculate the row columns, the column vector of A to the row vector of the B in order to get a value for a cell.
I mean, can you explain this expression? Why for computing this entire n cross n matrix, the total number of memory accesses is this?
Memory access. So it's because there will be n square multiplications required, followed by the additions, n additions. So I didn't get this 32 part.
This is what we have been discussing for the last half an hour, right? I mean, you have to be really attentive and you have to go through all the lectures, because I'm telling that this course is very much about real program optimization, which is device dependent, right? I mean, nothing at the high level. So please pay attention. So I will just explain once for you.
Okay.
So we are computing all the n square elements. So multiplication factor is n square times how much memory access is required for one element. How much is that required for one element? For accessing one element, first of all, note that this picture is wrong. This second matrix is the first one and the first matrix is the second one. So for computing one element, what is required? One thread, I mean the thread, the thread ID, I mean that thread is going to run through one row of the first matrix, right? And it should also run through and read all the elements of a single column of the second matrix. Now this is a row access. So all these elements are in the global memory consecutively, right? That means for all the parallel threads, when such access, these accesses are being made. So this thread, when it is accessing the first element from the global memory, it is actually getting 32 elements together. That is what we have been discussing for the last 1 hour as global memory coalescing, right? So for the thread to access all these elements, n by 32 accesses are required. N accesses are not required. But here, when I am accessing a column, considering that the matrix is much bigger than 32 here, so each of the column elements will be accessed by the same thread and each of them will require a separate global memory access. That is the most important thing. So n plus n by 32, right? And assuming that n is very, very greater than 32, it is almost of the order of n cube. So please be attentive, and if you have any doubts, you keep on asking. Otherwise, I mean, this is going to be difficult if you do not have really a hardware background here. Okay. So everybody, is this clear? Why this is so? Because this is the most important thing, right? I mean, we are trying to show how memory access coalescing is having its effect when we are trying to calculate what is the total number of memory accesses required. So since there are n square threads, so n square, and for each thread, for the row that is n by 32 number of accesses, for the column there is going to be n number of accesses, because you are accessing an n sized column, n is very big. So each of the elements will require separate global memory transactions. Is that fine, everybody? Any doubt, or we'll just go ahead? Okay. Now the next thing here is, so anybody from the other departments, anybody who has any doubt, please let me know, because this is one of the most important things we'll be studying through this course. Hello. Fine, then let's go ahead. So now the next thing we are trying to see is how matrix multiplication, the algorithm can be implemented in a more efficient way using what we know as tiling. So let's understand what is tiling. The strategy is that we like to make use of the shared memory which is resident inside each streaming multiprocessor. So what we'll do is we'll make the threads collaborate. In this naive matrix multiplication computation, no thread is doing anything apart from its individual loads, right? Now, let's understand that why there is a scope of collaboration, first of all, in matrix multiplication. So before getting into any of this definition of tiles, let's just directly look here. So see, on the right hand side, this is the target matrix that you want to compute, right? Now, let's first understand, if I have to compute the elements in this region, what is the elements in the matrix 1 and what are the elements in the matrix 2 you need access to. So are you convinced that these are the regions in matrix 1 and these are the regions in matrix 2 where you need access to compute all the elements here?
Yes, sir.
Right? Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So now let's understand, to compute this data point, what are the elements that I require? To compute this data point, I require all the elements from here and all the elements here, right? I mean, is this red marker visible to your screen that I am sliding
Yes.
here?
Yes, sir.
So for computing this element, I need access to all these elements in this row, and I need access to all these elements in this column. Now shift your focus to the next element. To compute all the elements in this row, in this location, I again need access to the same row, but I need access to a second column. Now let's try and appreciate. If somehow I have used, now how many threads are available to me for computing this? I have this many threads only for computing these values. In my naive matrix multiplication implementation, what happens? Each thread is doing their job independently. This guy is computing for this, so he is bringing on this data and this data. The next thread will compute for this, so he will again bring the same row and shift to the next column, right? So although this row was common, these threads didn't collaborate. But it would have been better if both the threads have worked together to bring some of the data independently and collaborated. Now let's understand how this can be done. So I have got this many threads working, right? I have got this many threads working to compute this tile. This is called a tile. I mean, a tile is nothing but a region of the matrix. I am dividing the matrix into 9 regions here. So I have a tile whose width is matrix width by 3 times matrix height by 3, right? So these many threads I have. So what I will do is, I will ask these many threads to first load these many values from the input matrix 1. So all will be parallel reads. Hello?
Yes, sir.
So all the
Yes, sir.
threads are reading in parallel these locations. So one read operation per thread. As simple as that. And definitely you can understand that some of these reads from the global memory are anyway coalesced, right? Because this row will be read in a coalesced manner, the second row will be read in a coalesced manner, the third row will be read in a coalesced manner, the fourth row will be read in a coalesced manner. But I don't read all the full rows. I just read this much of data, right? I have this many threads. I have this many 16 threads, 4 cross 4. So I just make these 4 cross 4 16 threads to read this much of data. And then I make them read this much of data from this column, right? See, what is the good thing here? I am spreading by read across rows, although I am not reading the full rows now. I am also spreading my read across columns. So earlier I was reading a single column, but now I am actually spreading it across a row, right? So I will have some amount of good coalescing here also when I am reading elements from the column, right? So in that way, first of all, let's forget the coalescing of the global memory. Let's just understand I have 16 threads who made 16 parallel reads. But of course, while accessing the global memory, like I said, there will be some good effect of coalescing here and also here. But you have 16 reads and 16 reads from the matrix 1 and matrix 2. Then, well, I am done with the reads. Now I am going to compute. So I will put a synchronization marker because I am saying that, well, as long as all the reads from the two matrices by all these 16 threads is not complete, I must not compute. So I put a synchronization marker of that read. Now I am going to compute. What am I going to compute? I make thread 1 multiply these values with these values. And I make thread 2 multiply these values with these values, so on and so forth, right? So I am only I have not loaded the entire tile, entire row and entire column. I have just loaded one tile size here and wild tile size here. And I am making one thread proceed up to this and proceed up to this and store its partial sum value, which is going to be the final value here, but it is not computed fully because these are not loaded, these are not loaded. So thread ij is just scanning through from here to here and scanning through from here to here, multiplying the component values and storing the cumulative sum up to the last value, which is this multiplied by this, right? So that is the current value of the thread. Now what shall I do? Anybody?
Shift the tiles.
So now I will go to the next tile here and here, and I will do the same thing. What is the good thing happening here?
It's just a single, not the entire matrix is stored. A single tile is stored and a partial value is stored. So memory consumption is less used in storage.
No, the great thing here is I have chosen the tile size carefully so that the tile fits in the shared memory. So all these reads initially that I did, they have been performed on the shared memory. Okay. So I have loaded this tile in the shared memory. I have loaded this tile in the shared memory. Now each of these 16 threads, they are running in parallel, right? Once the loads are computed, they are running completely in parallel. And what are they doing? So each of them are computing 16 partial sum values, and they are getting all those values in the shared memory. They are getting all those values in the shared memory. What is the advantage? Had I been working like I did earlier, just think this thread who will compute this value, he will load all these values from the global memory, load all these values from the global memory, and compute this. Now just try and think what is this thread's total global memory read requirement. This thread earlier was reading all these values and all these values, right? So like we said, n plus n by 32. But now for each tile, this thread is reading only one element, and it is done. One element here and one element here. So suppose the total number of tile here is what? I mean, it is the width by tile size. So it is just reading twice of width by tile size number of global reads. And why doesn't it have to read anything else? Because the other global reads are done by the other threads in parallel, right? So the part thread reads is decreasing. That is the good case of the threads collaborating. Everybody is reading in parallel, and then everybody is putting these values in the shared memory, so that now you see the advantage. This thread has read only this value. This thread has only read this value. But is it going to make use of this value only? No. This thread is also making of use of this value, this value, this value, right? But these values have not been loaded by it. They have been loaded by other threads. And since they have been put in the shared memory, unlike the previous code, where every thread was doing its own job, that would also mean that every thread was storing whatever it is reading in its own local memory. No other thread would have any access to it. But now you are reading in the shared memory. So this thread has read the value here. The next thread has read the value here. But this next value and the next value, all those values, this thread is going to make use of. That is the advantage. Is it clear to everybody?
Yes, sir.
So due
Yes.
to this collaborative read, you are gaining a very, very nice speed up. So now let's have a look into the code. Again, I will just complete the discussion first. So in that way, if I can define a tile and do this load, then a synchronization, then compute, and store whatever partial sums I have, and then again I do the next tile load from here, and again compute, and keep on adding on those partial sums. Finally, when I have computed this and this with this bunch of threads only, I am done, right? I have got all the results for all these locations done together by making a very nice use of the shared memory based collaborative loading. I am not asking every thread to load all the elements it requires for its own computation. It is loading some of the values, some other thread is loading some of the values, and they are making good use. I mean, that is just like how people do research in modern times. I mean, you don't do all the work, you divide it among a set of co-authors, right? I mean, it's just like that. So that's a wonderful, so that is why this algorithm is such a simple and such a great example, because you will see a lot of algorithms where the basic idea of tiling finds its use, because there is, I mean, whenever you have this kind of collaborative use of data, this idea makes total sense, right? Now how do we really then write the code? Well, to make use of shared memory, you need all the threads to be inside a block. So make the tile same as your block size, right? And divide the matrix to that many blocks. So now you just write the kernel, and the rest of it will just take care of it, right? So you just keep in your mind what will be the behavior for one block of threads, right? And you code that up. That, well, one block is like a tile, so that many threads will run it inside a loop. It will have a load from matrix 1, load from matrix 2, synchronize and compute, again load from matrix 1, again load from matrix 2. So there will be an iterative behavior of load and compute cycles per block, right? Now just you write that behavior, and for all the other blocks, the rest of it will take care of itself. Of course, you have to be extremely serious, and you have to be very confident about how you write the access expressions, so that all the other blocks will take care automatically of all the correct tiles, right? So these I will write the code. Now I am not going to explain why these access expressions are this. You can just understand based on the concept we discussed. So this is what is happening. This is a part block behavior, right? So like we discussed, there is this outer for loop. Inside each iteration of the loop, as you can see, each thread is making one load here from matrix 1, matrix M, another load here from matrix N. As I just described, each thread will make two loads from two of the matrices. And then the most important thing, they will synchronize. That means all the threads in the block, they will synchronize here, so that all of them have made their respective reads from matrix 1 and matrix 2, right? And then after this synchronization, we have the next loop, right, which is inside this loop only. What is this loop doing? So if I go back to this picture, so the first before the synchronization event, this thread has loaded element from here and here. Next thread has loaded element from here and here, like that. So at the synchronization point, this data has been taken in the tile, this data has been taken in the tile, which are there in the shared memory. after the synchronization point, what will happen? Each thread will do its own original matrix multiplication computation, but bounded inside the tile. That means thread 1 will compute this multiplied by this, right? So that's what is happening inside this thread, right? And that value is stored in a partial sum. And as you can see, this value will be updated again next time for the next tiles which are loaded. And as you can see, using this shared keyboard, we are actually creating two shared memory blocks per block, two shared memory segments per block for loading the tile from matrix 1 and loading the tile from matrix 2, right? So I think this is clear now. So if we do a pictorial example, yes? Yes?
Sir, can we keep the tile width as high as possible such that the shared memory is not overflown, or are there any drawbacks to keeping a large tile width?
No, as long as you can fit in the tiles inside the shared memory, there is no drawback.
Okay.
But the tile size should divide the matrix widths and heights. Otherwise, your code will not be optimized.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. I mean, you can try on that. Okay. Yes.
But sir, it would also be beneficial if the tile widths are about the same size as the memory read which I do. Because in that case, suppose my width is for 8 cells, that is 8 into 4 bytes. Then if my tile width is 4 by 4, then also I will take four memory reads for each tile. And if I have a size of 8 by 8, then also I will take 4 reads.
See, I mean, this thing, this thing is very much dependent on the size of the overall matrix in which you are working. Let's say you are working on a 1 lakh cross 1 lakh size matrix. Okay. See, what you are saying, I understand. You are saying that if my tile width is same as memory width, right? Because then what is happened is I will get the good effect of memory coalescing. That's what you are saying,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
I understand. But observe something. If you can have a bigger tile, the bigger is your tile, the bigger is your memory reuse that you are able to do, right? While computing the partial sums. Hello?
Like the big, yes, sir.
So that is really an optimization, and there would be a sweet spot. I hope you got my argument. If I get a bigger tile, that means what? That means I have to make less number of iterations of the outer loop itself, right?
Yes, sir.
That
Yes,
is
sir.
point. And second point is, if there is a bigger tile, then the part thread number of loads I have to do will also decrease. So it's
Yes, sir.
basically an optimization in terms of the part thread number of loads I have to do and the amount of time which is taken for each load. I mean, how much coalescing we are getting. Now, what will happen, you see, if I have a sufficiently wide tile, I mean, let's say this tile is wider than 32 and all that, okay? Then anyway, I am getting coalesced access to the memory to load elements to the shared memory. Are you getting my point? I mean, don't think that this is 4 wide. Let's say it is, I mean, the tile size is, let's say 128 cross 128. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So anyway, you will get those memory coalescing behaviors when you are loading up a tile, right?
Yes, sir. So at max, I will get just one of not completely utilized memory access, because I would have, say, suppose if I 128 and 32, so, or suppose 130, then also I will have 4 reads and 1 read which was not completely utilized.
Right.
Yes.
But the bigger the tile size, I am getting more amount of data in for the threads to collaboratively do the computation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So
Sir,
try
but,
on this. Yes.
Sir, but we could also do, for example, that the last we could have checks if else conditions, and maybe the last cell does not access locations. So for if I can could explain, sir, for example, if I have 130 and then 128 is divided into tiles. The next 2 goes into the next tile, but the empty locations of the tiles are not used, so that could also be used. Or
You are saying when the tile width doesn't divide the width. That's what you are saying?
yes sir, yes sir.
Yeah, so then there will be some wasted reads for the last boundary tiles actually. And you can actually manage that. All you have to do is you have to put suitable if else's around these loads.
Yes.
So I mean the suitable professional version of this program will actually bound these loads by if else's. But since we have an introductory class, we are trying to hit upon the idea of using tiles. We are not making the program look unnecessarily complex. But as you can understand, if we have that boundary case, then all I will need to do is just bind the I mean guard these loads and guard the computes by suitable FLSS, which will take care of the boundary. That it will first detect whether these are the boundary tiles, and then accordingly they will use some different load pattern.
Yes sir.
Okay, try writing that code. I think that professional version is anyway widely available. You can just check it out. We don't use it for the teaching because it's the first time we are kind of trying to make people appreciate what is the good thing about it. Definitely the boundary cases are there. Okay. Okay, so just another pictorial example here. So as you can understand, I mean, taking a simple example. So as I was saying, there are load and compute cycles, right? So for computing this block here, I am first going to load this element, this tile and this tile. Once that is done, I will do the compute. So that will give me a partial sum of this output based on the loading of this tile and this tile, right? And then again I have to shift to the next tile. So again I will shift from here to the next tile, and from the next matrix I am already done with this, so I go to the next tile here column wise. So I go to this tile, right? Again I am loading them and then the compute, right? So by scanning through like this and scanning through like this, I am doing the load compute cycles just like I have explained. Fine. So let's understand the optimization. If I do like this, if you recall earlier, this was my total number of memory accesses, right? The global memory accesses. So it was of the order of n cube because 32 is considered, I mean, n is considered much bigger than 32, right? And now when you see, first let's understand what is the number of memory accesses for computing a single tile. So for computing a single tile, what do I need? I have to figure out what is the number of memory access to load a single tile multiplied by the number of tiles I am loading from the matrices, right? So of course, for computing one single tile, I have to load how many matrices? So let's say the matrices are n cross n and tiles are w cross w. Then from this side, I have to load n by w matrices, right? And from this matrix also I have to load n by w matrices, right? Because that many tiles will exist for computing one output tile. So total number of tiles required will be 2n by w, right? Now inside one tile, how many loads are there? How many global memory loads are there? Let's just think. I hope this was clear, right? So this is one tile. I want to compute one tile. So how many global memory transactions are required? So for that, as you can see, for this one tile, I have to load this tile, and this tile. So n by, if tile size is w, so the number of tiles I have to load is n by w, and again n by w from this slide, right? From this matrix. So 2n by w. Now for one tile, how many loads are there? Anybody? So these are all w cross w tiles and matrices are n cross n. How many loads from the global memory I have to do for this tile?
W squared.
W squared? Hello?
Sir, are we considering for a tile or for a single element?
For one tile, I am loading this entire tile, right, into the shared memory. Question is how many global memory loads are required for that?
W plus W by 32.
W squared by 32, right?
Sorry, W square by 32. Yes, sir. Right.
Is it clear to everybody? Why W square by 32?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Because it's same as earlier, right? So what is happening? Hello? So total elements you have is W square here, right? But if you have a sufficiently large tile, I mean, don't think that the tiles are 4 cross 4. Think that it's a sufficiently large tile, right? So in each row, you will have lot of values. So all of them can be coalesced ideally. So this row will be W by 32, right? Again, the next row is W by 32. It's like that only, right? And you have W number of rows. Is it clear? Anybody, any question here?
No, sir. Clear. Yeah.
Arusaka Bose. I think,
Yes, sir.
yeah. So did you understand the W square by 32 logic?
Yes, sir.
Is this
Sir, but
fine?
one thing,
Yeah.
sir, the 2n by W that you calculated, that is for a single thread, right?
No, not single thread. For all the threads who are participating in this tile, what is the total number of memory accesses that has to be done? That is what I mean. Let's forget threads. Look at the amount of computation required for computing this final output matrix one time. Okay. So for doing this, the threads they are responsible, they will need to load how many tiles? So they will need to load n by W from here and n by W from here. That is the argument. How many tiles are there in this row and how many tiles are there in this column? Hello?
Okay, sir.
Got it? See, I mean, if anybody has a question, please ask, because this thing you should clear it up. I am trying to see what is the total number of global memory transactions that is required for computing the output of the size of one tile. So for that, I am finding out for computing this tile, how many tiles were loaded from the global memory. So I loaded these many tiles from matrix 1 and these many tiles from matrix 2. How many tiles? N divided by W. Similarly, this side again N divided by W, right? So 2N by W tiles. Now the question is, for loading each tile, how many global memory transactions are required? Assume that the tile is very big here, right? So what will happen? You have W number of rows to load, and inside each row, all the 32 consecutive values you will be getting in one transaction, right? So W times W by 32 global memory transactions will be required by all the collaborating threads, right? Because the threads who are operating here, they will be packed into warps, and when those warps will be accessing the global memory, so what will happen is, let's say the warps which are accessing consecutive locations in the global memory, their memory transactions will be coalesced, right? So assume that this is not 4 cross 4, assume that this is 128 cross 128. So you have 128 rows, and for each row, you are going to have only 4 global memory transactions, right? So that is why 128 times 128 by 32. So W square by 32 number of global memory transactions will be required by 128 cross 128 threads to bring one tile. And the number of tiles will be n divided by 128 from here plus n divided by 128 from here. Fine. So that is the amount of memory access required for computing one tile. Now then, what is the total number of memory accesses required? It is simply this multiplied by what? Computing for, how many tiles? What is the total number of tiles here? If matrix is n cross n and tile size is W cross W, what is the total number of tile?
N by W square.
N square by W square.
N
N
square
square by W square. So just we have computed earlier what is the total number of access required for computing one tile. So total memory accesses for computing the entire matrix is that previous figure multiplied by N square by W square. So overall what you get is and n cube divided by 16w. Whereas earlier it was just proportional to n cube, right? So as you can see, if you increase the tile size, the total number of memory access will decrease by that as a big factor, right? So this is going to increase the speed up of matrix multiplication by an order of magnitude. Is this clear?
Sir, I have a doubt in the code.
Okay.
Means in the for loop, why do you use the sync threads?
In the for loop, why do we use the sync thread? Good question.
Means after loading, we use the sync threads. That is okay, but why do we use it inside the for loop?
So one thread computing its for loop and it is done, right? So, okay. You see, suppose you don't do the sync thread here. Okay, so you are reading from this, and then suppose I don't give the sync thread here. What would that mean? That thread will progress and go to its compute cycle. That's what you are saying, right? I mean, it has finished its compute. If I don't give the sync thread here, then that thread will just go forward into the next iteration and it will start doing the loads for the next tile.
But sir, we could have given the sync threads after the for loop also.
Let me tell. No. First, let me finish.
Sure.
See, what is this for loop doing?
This for loop is computing the p value for that specific tile.
Right. So it is computing. Let's say I'm taking this thread. So when that thread has finished its load cycle and passed the previous barrier of sync thread, now that thread is computing its partial sum using that for loop, right? And
Yes,
let
sir.
all the threads, since there was a previous sync thread, due to this thread, one thing is assured that all the threads are together in the compute cycle, right? This load and compute cycle, again load and compute cycle. So now what is happening? All the threads are in the compute cycle, and now let's say without putting that second synchronization barrier, what happens? So some threads will finish their compute cycle earlier while some threads are still working on their compute cycle. So suppose this thread has finished earlier. So then without the next sync thread, this thread will go to its next load cycle. So now it will start loading elements from the next tile to the shared memory. Got it? So if this sync thread is not there, then that I, j locations thread, let's say it will finish first, and then it will go to the next iteration of the for loop, whereas the other threads are already still here. So they are accessing the shared memory to compute their partial sum, and this thread has gone forward, and that means gone forward means it is now in the next iteration of the for loop, whereas the other threads are in the previous iteration and they are doing the partial sum. And this thread will now start loading data from the global memory and updating its corresponding location, right, in the shared memory. And whatever location it is updating, they may be used by the other threads who have not finished their compute cycle. So that is the problem. So I will need this sync thread.
Okay, means that is understood, but why do we need the sync threads in every iteration of the for loop? Means we could place it after the for loop.
No, this thing is not inside this for loop, right? This for loop ends here itself. See, this for loop is not inside a bracket.
Okay. From the structure, I thought that it.
No. This sync thread is preventing all the threads to go to the next load cycle unless everybody's compute has finished, for the obvious reason I explained.
Oh, okay, I got it.
So, it should be a load versus then again compute by everybody. Again a load, then again a compute by everybody. So if I don't put the second sync thread, then this barrier will not come. And if this barrier not comes, So somebody is computing and the other threads are starting to load. Then whoever is still computing, he will have different data points to work with, and that will be a complete mess. But anyway, this is a good question. I didn't explain that in terms of the program. So everybody, was this discussion clear to you?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Raunak Patro, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So with this, we'll end today's discussion. I think from this week, I mean, although we have uploaded the material for transpose, but for this week, I mean, we actually wanted to break it in 2 sessions. So today we'll then upload the material for the video material for the transpose related activities, and that we will discuss again in the next class.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
In normal CPU matrix multiplication, there is a possible optimization by transposing the second matrix first and then multiplying row wise. Is there any such optimization available here in this case?
Transposing the second matrix and then?
Sir, like if we transpose the second matrix, then instead of accessing column wise, we can access row wise. So it will lead to a reduction.
Yeah. But before doing that, you have to know how to do transpose efficiently in a GPU.
No, assuming we can do transpose efficiently, like is there any possible benefit to transposing the second matrix and then multiplying it?
If there is any benefit in the algorithm, then there will be a benefit in the implementation. I mean, are you asking whether the idea of that transpose and this tiling can be combined together?
Yes.
You send me that algorithm, I will see and look forward. There are many such variations. Which one you are speaking, I have to see.
And I don't know if it's possible in GPU or not. In CPU it is possible. In GPU I don't know if it's possible or not.
No. It's about compute. I understand your idea. All you are saying is you will transpose, and if you transpose, then the access to the second matrix is also column wise. Row wise access, right? That's what you are saying.
Yes.
But then what the thing that you are maybe neglecting is the cost of doing the transpose. Like you will see in future that doing transpose itself involves lot of cost. So if that cost, given your matrix dimension, if that cost is worth it, then why not? Got my point?
Okay.
Sir, as we are tiling, so anyway, one side will be coalesced and the other side would not be. So,
right.
So I don't think it would work.
Yeah, but I am not. What you are saying is one side is coalesced and other side is not coalesced. What he is saying is, if I transpose, then everything is like a row access. I am not commenting because I am also thinking. Then what if somebody says that I will not form tiles? See, why do we need to form tiles here in 2 dimensions? We are trying to form tiles here in 2 dimensions because in 1 dimension we have full coalescing, in the other dimension we have no coalescing. So in the dimension in which we have no coalescing, we are trying to increase coalescing. That is the very basic philosophy here, right? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. But the thing is, like he is saying, if you transpose, then maybe one thing can help is, since both sides you have row based coalescing, then why not define tiles fully in the row side? That may be put into use. So I am not completely committing to that there won't be any advantage. You got my point?
Yes, sir. Got it.
In this case, I am trying to do it in 2 dimensions because I am trying to have coalescing in both dimensions, which is not there in the naive matrix multiplication. But if I transpose and get full coalescing in because both are row based, then maybe there is some advantage. But again, the issue is doing transpose itself is a very costly operation, and there are a lot of things inside it. It's very exciting also. We'll just speak about it in the next lecture. I am not sure. Some of you may have already looked into this PDF that we have uploaded. If you have, it's fine. If you haven't, that's better because then we will be providing the videos today. So look into what great optimizations exist for just doing a matrix transpose, and that is also something we'll discuss in detail in the next lecture. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So one thing regarding the projects, so we have defined the projects and allocated teams. I got one or two requests for team change. Try and understand if you are in a team, let's say, and you suddenly say that you switch me to a different team, it disturbs, right? Because suppose I got explanations like I am from department, I mean I have all my friends in some other team, so I want to go there. I am not allowing that because the person who is requesting, I see that he is right now in a heterogeneous team, but there is also another person with him in that same, from that same department in that heterogeneous team. And if I suddenly shift this guy, then the other guy will be alone in that team, right? I mean, so that's not fair to the other guy. But still I gave an option to whoever emailed me that if you want to switch team, it's fine, but you get another guy from your target team to switch to your team. So there is a mutual consensus based swap. I mean, in fact, somebody from the class itself proposed this, which I found fair enough. So that I am allowing. Otherwise, for single swap, I mean, it will never. Uh, Sorry, I got disconnected. So I don't think that it's very difficult to form a group in WhatsApp or Gtalk and collaborate and work on the project just because we are all operating remotely. If we are all operating remotely, then also we have to change our way of work and we have to collaborate in a different way. So that we have to figure it out, right? So let's not use that as an excuse. If you are in a team where you know some people, you may not know some people, but remember that all of you together are in a batch who are doing this course. So I mean, you try and collaborate and get the work done. In future, when you get placed in some company, you don't have a choice of a team member, right? So I mean, I don't think it's a good excuse. So let's get the work done, collaborate and get the work done. If it is the case that in your team you are working, somebody else is not working, it will reflect in your presentation and report. So that guy won't get the suitable credit which you will get. So don't think about it. You be serious about your project, and whatever your team defines that this is the part you will do, you do that seriously. Okay. Any other?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, in my team regarding the project, one member has dropped the course. So
Fine. I mean, how many members are there?
sir, 8, I think. 8 or
So
7.
fine, then you have 7 members, right? So do it.
Okay, sir.
Just let us know over a email who is the person who is not there. We will just check with our records.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Sir, regarding my registration on the ERP,
Yes.
Professor Devdutt is looking into it. So as soon as is there any update, I'll just reply back on the same email.
Yeah, because still now, if you are not registered, then I am not sure. I mean, so if see, we don't have a problem if academic section is allowing you to register.
Okay.
But it should not happen like now. Soon there will be one test, right? We already had a one short test. We'll have 2 more long tests, and then in March again there will be another long test by the other teacher. So like in future when we have that long test, you will give the test because you have to, but you are not registered, then your efforts will be wasted. So please figure that out very quickly, right?
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
otherwise it's not working. I mean, it's not helping you really.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you can ask your supervisor to talk with the academic deputy registrar's office, and they can say what is the problem.
Yeah, I had a word just before the class, so
Okay.
so he said that he told them, but it seems that they haven't done it.
Okay,
But
so figure that out quickly. Otherwise, your efforts may get wasted. That's what I'm saying. So you are in the term projects group.
yes, sir, last group 9.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye then.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.